Okay, let's call the meeting to order at 6:01. Nancy, you've got attendance? You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yes, I got everyone here.
Okay, thank you. We have minutes from April 19th for approval.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Ike, second by Jesse. Thank you. Any comments on the minutes?
Mr. Chair?
Patrick?
Yeah, Nancy, real quick, I just had one very minor edit. There's 3 twos in the in the minutes of approving the minutes under old business. 3-2-2-2-2-3. Just a real minor typo there. And then just one quick question. So the invoice that we tabled the last time, that's the one that's on the agenda tonight from SJN. I think you might be on mute.
SLR, yes,
I'm
that's correct.
sorry, SLR.
Yes,
Okay, that's why I just wanted to make sure we have the same invoice that was tabled. That was all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ike, you're good with those changes?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right, anybody else? If not, everybody in favor of approving minutes as noted, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Motion passes. Thank you. All right. So let's go to, we have some updates, not enough, but some. Let's go to, we have Deanna here from TSKP. You're first.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Actually, we don't have any updates this week from our part. Not sure if anybody has any questions, but still waiting for the documents to go out to bid.
Right. That's kind of where we're at today. Questions for Deanna? Okay, let's go to, we have Scott and Anthony.
Good evening, everyone.
Downs.
We have a few
How's
updates.
everybody doing?
And we'll share the screen here. So we do have some good news. We did receive correspondence from Melinda from DCD this afternoon, actually not too long ago. And she gave a 2-page bulleted list that you see on your screen in response to our draft bid documents. I didn't see anything in regards to the design documents, so I think we're good there. Just some items that we need to add to our bid documents, and some items actually that we already had in there, but did respond to her accordingly. And we're going to be working on these bullet points to get them back to her this week, along with some minor changes in the advertisement and with some dates, and send that back to her for final approval, which I think will come very quickly. Which will then lead us to be able to go into an advertisement and bid, as long as the town is okay with that based on what's going on with the grants. And we are ready to go to bid. I wanted to talk about the schedule today. We did update it, and I want everyone to just be aware that these dates are still a little fluid because they're not set based on the fact that we're not out to bid yet. And when we are out to bid, they will be set dates upon the next update. So we were putting out another projection we were hoping to get DCD's response last week, and we ended up getting it today. So when we updated the schedule earlier this week, we projected it out to the end of this week, May 5th. All right, which essentially puts a bid period to start out next week. So that again is still fluid, but we're ready to do it. We have an advertisement that would have to be put up on the DAS portal and go out to a few newspapers, which it does take a couple days to get the ads out into the newspapers. But we can work our way with that and getting a bid out. And then that would flow through with a bid period to June, to the first week of June, with scope reviews from the first week of June to the first week of July. We did put the owner demobilization in here tentatively as June 15th, as we previously discussed in owners meetings. And an approval of the GMP for July. And then towards the end of July, going into a notice to proceed with trades. All right. So we're gonna respond to this as quickly as we can with DECD. Hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, we get that out so Linda can review it again. And we can gain an approval. Now, we've also, along with the update of the pre-construction, we've updated a summary of the construction period for both McMahon and Prosser. Now, McMahon, as we're aware, was over 10 months due to the switchgear issues that we got through with a solution on a panelized system for that project. So it's back to 10 months in about a week, which is where we want to be. All right. By not being able to purchase the switchgear early due to some of the grant issues, it does still present an issue for Prosser, which was originally 16 months and now it's been pushed out to 21, which is pretty substantial. Now, we think that we have a couple solutions in regards to the switchgear, which is the main entity that's pushing this job out because it takes a year and a half to get when you're getting a normal switchgear, if you will, that's not panelized. And we have a couple solutions that we've been putting together, and we're going to be presenting to RZ, the engineer, the electrical engineer, tomorrow. And we have for them to review, and TSKP is also aware of this. And we will be having a meeting with them next Monday afternoon. And then Tuesday, we have an owners meeting where we're going to present where we want to go with some of the solutions that we're going to present in order to walk this time back to 16 months. Which we think we can do. There's just a bit of engineering that would have to occur for that to happen. And I don't want to really get into the weeds with it in this building committee meeting yet, until the engineers reviewed what our possible solutions are. And we're a little more firm on it, like we were with McMahon, with their backing and what would have to be done for the documents as we've done with McMahon. All right, so that is something that we are currently working through. But we do have our schedules ready, and we have our bid documents ready to go. And it looks like we just have some tweaks that we're going to have to make based on DECD's comments, which shouldn't be an issue based on what I'm seeing. Just some documentation that we're going to need to do in the next couple of days, really tomorrow. Mr. Chair, any questions?
Questions for Scott, Anthony?
I have a quick one, just for clarification. I think I've asked you this already, Scott, but when it says construction at McMahon done June 2024, does that mean when we're able to be in the libraries, or is there another period of time to get into the libraries?
Yes, that's our certificate of completion or occupancy that the building inspector allows you to be able to move in. So that's not your move-in date. That's okay. The building's been approved and accepted by the town. So after that date, you can start moving in. So that's kind of how you look at it with both projects.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lois?
Could you clarify for me why the switchgear is still a problem if we're not getting the state library grant? Because why does it matter when we make the arrangements for purchasing that? I thought the whole problem with the state grant had to do with contracts being done too soon. And if there's no state grant, why do we care?
Do you want me to answer that, Scott?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer.
Okay, so Lois, there are still 2 state grants. We're working through that process as we speak.
I guess I need a little more clarification on where we are then, because the last I heard we were responding and the town manager responded, and I haven't heard anything positive since then.
Chair, do you want me
That's
to address?
next on the agenda.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, that's next on the agenda, so we'll hear from Elizabeth and
All right.
others.
But if
So-
we could,
Yeah.
I think for Lois's question though, I think one of the things that Downs was alluding to, Lois, was that they think that they have some. There was something that was built into the bid specs regarding some different types of engineering that would be required on the fly or as part of the submission with the bid. With the switchgear for processor, and those are the things that they're looking at now. That could shorten that delay, I mean, that time period for processor from 21 months back to 16 months.
So that's a workaround.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a workaround, Lois, and it's based on very recent experience. When I say very recent, within the month of April, based on taking a chance and it worked.
Okay, I just want to be sure we do not delay this project more than we need to.
But
Downs is
essentially, essentially the grant is no longer, whether we get the grant or we don't get the grant, it's really no longer in play as far as proceeding with, getting this thing out to bid. So we're going to get into that too tonight. So essentially we're going to buy the switchgear, it's part of the bid package. So,
Okay.
so, either way it's happening now, or it will be happening. We hope it will be happening now. But yeah, we'll get into that. As a matter of fact, we're just about there. More questions for,
I just had one more thing.
go ahead, Elizabeth.
If we're reading that timeline correct, I believe the town internet hub has already been moved.
Oh, I can close that out.
Yeah,
Okay.
Elizabeth is correct. Yes, it has.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. That's fine.
That's good.
I'll check it off the list.
Anything else for Scott?
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, guys. So Chip was unable to join us tonight. We know that he is still working ongoing, with our upcoming landlord, just holding him at bay until we pin down that date. So hopefully we're very, very close to that. That's the only thing he had relayed to me. And Nancy, I don't know if he had said anything else to you. What's going on with Chip?
No,
Okay.
no other update.
All right, so let's move on and talk about the grants. Elizabeth, I'll let you take the lead as to what's happened since last time.
So we have a meeting set up for this Friday between the town and the state library. We also sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the state library asking for documents about the grant process. Through some investigations, we found out that we are not the only ones to have this issue. So we're trying to learn from some of our colleagues around the state what they went through. The town has also received a Freedom of Information Act request about our correspondence with the state library, so we're complying with that. And with the last response that was shared with the entire library building committee by Nancy, the governor has been formally looped in and has been notified about what has been going on. And to get back to the Freedom of Information Act request that we submitted to the state library, it is a request to have more information about the approval, withdrawals, and forfeitures of other grants in the past 10 years. So more information will be coming, but we still remain very hopeful about the grants.
So the 2 points that the letter from our town manager made to the state library, which they have since responded to, was number one, we want to go out to bid, regardless of the issue of whether or not we're going to get this grant. Because officially, according to their guidelines, they need to approve our bid documents before we can go to bid. So we very strongly, again, at the recommendation of our town attorney, we very strongly asked them, and gave them a date, please review our bid documents. You have them. And let's get on with the bid and we can still talk about whether we're gonna get the grant or not. And basically the response was they were not in a position to do that. So basically, they've refused to review our bid documents, which with no explanation. The other thing about our, the town manager letter, number 2 to the state library, was we want to meet and talk about this. And so that they replied positively, and that's what's happening on Friday. It will be a Zoom meeting. Town attorney will be present. And our intent is to make our case with them more or less in person, give it, it's a Zoom meeting, but at least we'll be not just emails flying back and forth. So they did agree to do that. So, there's all kinds of possibilities on Friday, including further delays, which is probably the most likely thing that's going to happen. But with any luck, things may turn positive, and we all hope that's going to happen. But now that we have, or will have, really almost immediately approval from DECD to go to bid, I think we have a decision to make. And Lois, I know you had raised it at previous meetings. What if we get DECD approval and we're still waiting for the state library to go to bid? What do we do? So I wanted to just, open that up for discussion. We've been hanging on here, waiting for the state for a long time. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for some, for your thoughts on that. Lois?
Mark, did I hear you say that we cannot go to bid whether or not there are grants coming from the state library without the state library approving our bid documents?
No, the only jurisdiction they would have about approving our bid documents is if we in fact are getting the grant.
Okay, so we can go straight to bid if we're not getting the grants without their approval of our bid documents.
Correct. That is correct.
And it seems now that we're in the midst of a FOIA war, which could either help us or hurt us. And I guess my feeling is that we should go ahead and get the documents out as soon as we can. This has been months now. And if we're going to war with the state library board, it will be even longer. Unless somebody knows something politically that I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything in that regard. Thanks, Lois. Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think I agree with Lois. I guess a couple of things. So if we wait till Friday at least to just see what happens in that meeting, in case they say we could still go out to bid while they're reviewing this thing, or taking it under reconsideration, then we would be able to go out to bid. But are we saying we're going to go to, if we go to bid regardless, and they come back later and say, oh, okay, we were going to approve your request, isn't it going to be too late? I mean, what would be the point if we go out to bid and they come back and say they would approve? Our bid documents are already out. So I mean, are we at a losing either way? If I'm making sense, whether we wait or we don't wait, it seems like that state grant, there's no point in pursuing it because it's just going to further delay us. I mean, what is the bad thing that happens if we don't get that the $1 million? I mean, what do we stand to lose out of our scope of work? We
don't know that until
we don't
the
know
bids
that.
come in.
Okay.
Right. Once the bids come in, we know what the job will cost, and we'll see if we have to make some cuts somewhere, either in
Right
or whatever. But until the bids come in, we won't know where we stand if we are indeed $1 million short on our overall budget.
Yeah. So do we wait till Friday, see what they say? I mean, perhaps they will say, you know, they're willing to let us go to bid while they're in the process of reviewing the documents. Or do we just after Friday, regardless of what they say, we go out to bid, and then do they then just stop their process and we forfeit the bid? Or I guess, I don't know what happens. If we decide to go, what is the point of the whole FOIA? Like, how far is this gonna go?
Well, the other issue at hand is whether we're getting the grant or not. Is whether-
Right.
Right, there's the approval from them to go to bid, and there's the approval from them to get the grants. So, I mean, I have a suggestion on how we could move forward here as a group, and that's to defer until Friday and act on advice from our town attorney. As far as whether or not to go to bid. Following that, I don't know if that makes sense to people. We've got a lot of.
It's only a couple days. I mean,
Right. Elizabeth?
I just wanted to clarify that all of this is happening between the town of Bloomfield and the state librarian. The state library board, as far as we know, are not fully in the loop on what is happening.
Nancy?
Yes, just some additional food for thought. We have a lease for the swing space, which we have not executed yet, and we've been pushing the property owner back a little bit on the start date. And they're getting kind of antsy, as reported by Chip, and Chip isn't here to give the information, but he has reported that in owners' meetings. And I think the longer we delay, the more we risk losing that swing space on top of it. So, you know, something for you to take into consideration as you consider whether or not you want to continue to hold up bidding.
Thanks, Nancy. Lois?
I just would like to clarify, I've been in favor of trying to get both of these grants from the beginning. But the reality is that we can't spend more money than was authorized in the bond issue, whether we have the grants or not. So getting the $2 million would be very nice from a tax perspective for all the citizens of Bloomfield, because it would be the state money, not our money. But the fact that we have two grants of $1 million apiece isn't going to add to what we can spend. We can't spend more than the bond authorization, is my understanding.
Well, Lois, that would only be true with the McMahon grant, because the Prosser grant has already been acted on by the town council as we are allowed to spend that money in addition to the
Okay,
amount that went to referendum.
I must have lost that piece of information. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have 1 million additional to spend beyond the bond amount.
If we get it.
If we get it, right. So that would affect our budget, the Prosser grant. The McMahon grant would not affect our budget, only what the amount we would be borrowing in the long run. All right, do we, somebody want to make a motion about?
So move, Mr. Chairman. I
What-
move that.
what- Go ahead.
I move what you suggested, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how to put it in words. That we concur, talk with the town attorney and wait till Friday, then move ahead.
Okay. And do we have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Patrick, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any more discussion? Lois?
I'd like to understand the motion. Does this mean that based on what the town attorney decides, we will or will not move ahead by going to bid if we've gotten the DECD stuff straightened out? It seems to me that that's a responsibility of this committee, not of the town attorney.
That is correct, as I understand, as I suggested the motion and as I understand it. The wild card in here is what happens on Friday. You know, that's why I was suggesting this, because there's going to be new information on Friday. And it may, and at this point, our town attorney is up to speed on this whole issue. And that's why I wanted to get his input, following Friday on whether or not we should go to bid. It may be, I mean, possibly there's a short delay for some reason between Friday and going to bid.
And maybe we consider instead that the motion maybe should be that we go out to bid upon the recommendation of the town attorney. Unless he says no.
I think that's what we have on the table, isn't it? Bob, is
Right.
that?
Right, because we're not, the town attorney doesn't dictate what we go to the town attorney and seek guidance, and it's up to the committee to move forward, not the town attorney. So it's just, well, Marcus is just trying to put something in place so we can move ahead. It's, our moving ahead is not incumbent upon approval from the town attorney.
Well, that was not my idea. Let's clarify this motion, please.
Okay,
And so, yeah, I think Nancy, what you just said there, that we would move ahead we would go to bid upon approval from the town attorney.
Recommendation.
Upon recommendation, thank you, upon recommendation.
I accept that, Mark.
All right, Patrick, you good?
And the seconder accepts as well. I mean, and that's assuming that the meeting goes. I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with the motion, but after the meeting, the decision will be made. Unless the town attorney, for some reason, thinks waiting will be beneficial to us. If not, then we should just move forward. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. Then I agree with the amended
All right,
motion.
thank you, thank you. More discussion. All right, hearing none. Nancy, you want to take a roll call on that for me, please? All in favor?
Sure. Lois Hager,
Yes,
Patrick Di Lorenzo,
Yes.
Robert Ike,
Yes,
Jesse White,
Yes.
Dr. Bryant,
Yes.
and Mark
And
Weissman.
chair votes yes.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hopefully Friday makes it obvious for us. And we will be out to bid. Okay, anything else related to the grants here need to talk about? I think we're good. All right, so let's go to any committee reports, outreach or technology. Okay. All right, so Nancy, purchases, any purchases tonight?
No purchase.
No purchase and invoices, we have one, right?
One invoice. This is the tabled SLR invoice that I neglected to send out last time. It's invoice number 181116, and it's for traffic services, engineering services, and the amount is $120.
so moved.
Moved by Bob Ike, seconded by Patrick.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
aye,
Aye.
Any nays? I saw one no vote. Motion passes. Okay.
Oh, I missed the no vote. Who was the no?
Not a no, I'm sorry. I didn't see anything from Jesse,
Oh, okay.
but we have enough to pass. so
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, all right, so let's go to, that's it for invoices, right?
Yes,
Okay, upcoming meetings, 2 weeks. On the 17th, And I know Jesse, you will not be there and I will not be there. So I thank Patrick in advance for taking care of leading us on the 17th. And
Sure.
then next one is at the end of the month on the 31st. All right. Comments from the committee? Lois?
I felt kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of where we are with the grants, because seems to be a lot going on. So after the Friday, I would very much appreciate getting some kind of information for all of us about what happened at the Friday meeting and what the town attorney's recommendation was, and the time frame for moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Lois. Yes. Anybody else on the committee?
Elizabeth has her hand up.
Oh,
I
Okay,
just wanted
go
to
ahead.
say thank you to the Department of Economic Development for getting back to us about the bid documents and how excited I am to move forward. It's really, really great news and to have received that email today.
amen. Any other hands? All right. Public comment? Nancy, anybody in the public with their hands up?
Is anyone from the public that would like to speak? Please raise your virtual hand. No one has their hands raised.
No one? All right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully, we're going to have a lot more to report in the near future. And a lot more information. All right. Thanks, everybody, for their patience. Keep your fingers crossed on Friday that we have something positive. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Ike, seconded by Jesse. Thank you very much. All in favor? Say aye.
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 All right, everybody. Thank you. Be well.
Good night.
Thank you.